Now, this change in income inequality has no simple explanation. It would be really nice and neat if I could tell you a story of one big thing that changed and suddenly this threw everything out of whack. But in reality, there's a lot of different things going on, many factors that interact in unfortunately complex ways. So, luckily for us, we don't need to be an expert in this. We're just talking about trends. So, I'll give you a little bit of the background on some of these things that have been changing and contributing to the growth in income inequality in the US since, say, the 1960s. So, for example, we've seen changes in technology, increased globalization, and different labor market policies, and all of these play a role. Even just isolating the individual impacts of one of those, holding everything else constant can be challenging. So it's difficult for economists to try to estimate the specific effect of changes in any one of these categories. So economic fundamentals include things like technological advances, globalization, shifts in industry, so maybe decline in manufacturing, the rise of more high-tech firms. Labor market institutions refer to things like unions, minimum wage policies, employment laws, occupational licensing laws. These may have weakened in their ability to balance wage distributions over time. Remember, we talked about labor unions, about how they decreased income inequality within the labor union. They kept the wages kind of compressed together, putting downward pressure on higher earners' wages and putting upward pressure on lower earners' wages. These factors I just mentioned didn't act in isolation. They happened all at the same time, kind of reinforcing each other in a way. So technological changes like automation, computerization, and now the rise of AI potentially have created a skills bias. So workers with advanced skills or higher education are increasingly in demand and earning really high salaries because they're so productive, while jobs requiring fewer skills are becoming less common, and we're seeing downward pressure on their wages because there's more people able to work those jobs than there are jobs to go around. This shift is going to increase wages for skilled workers, and that's what we've seen, while stagnating or even lowering wages for unskilled workers. Increased physical capital helps to increase the productivity of skilled workers. Physical capital includes things like machines, tools, and technologies that are going to enhance worker productivity. For instance, a data scientist with advanced software or a surgeon with robotic tools can do much more. They can produce much more than their counterparts that don't have these types of resources. Even in things like automobile manufacturing, you have a lot more mechanization and a lot more technology being used in the production process that increases the productivity of auto workers. These skills tend to disproportionately benefit skilled workers in whatever industry they're taking place in. This creates a feedback loop of higher productivity and higher wages for those workers, but you don't see those gains for other workers. A decrease in the supply of skilled workers or an increase in the demand for skilled workers could cause a widening of the wage gap. In this case, if the supply of the skilled workers don't keep up with demand, wages for these workers naturally rise due to the competition among employers. Conversely, an oversupply of unskilled workers relative to demand is going to suppress their wages. These two things, if they happen simultaneously, can really increase income inequality. The downward sloping demand curve in this figure here suggests that when the wage of skilled workers rises, employers will want to hire few of them. This is the basic, or one of the basic takeaways from our supply and demand framework. Here we have a supply curve that's perfectly inelastic. So we're saying no matter what, we're not going to have a change in total supply of workers. That's all the workers we have right now. So it shows that the number of skilled workers is fixed at that point, whatever that number is. In this case, it's P0 for the supply curve S0. Initially, the labor market is in equilibrium at point A. Now, if the relative supply of skilled workers increases to S1, the only way to explain the increase in the relative wage of skilled workers is if there was a significant shift in the demand curve, say from D0 to D1, leading to a new equilibrium at point C. So, for example, let's think about this in the tech industry now. So as technology becomes more important, firms demand more skilled workers, but the supply of skilled workers may not be able to keep up immediately, pushing wages up higher. So you have an increase in supply in the short term, but the increase in supply isn't enough to keep up with the increase in demand. So maybe firms want to hire, let's say throughout the entire economy, 10,000 more workers. but the supply only increases to say 5,000 more workers. What's going to happen with that shortage of workers where we don't have enough to fill the demand that firms have? That's going to push up the wages of those highly skilled workers as firms compete with each other to hire these workers and try to poach them from one another. Now, over time, if more people pursue relevant education or training, supply of skilled workers will increase even more and get us back to the point, where the wage isn't naturally increasing. You push it back so it stays the same as it was at point A. But this can explain what's going on, especially in the short term, for why we see an increase in income inequality. If firms demand for highly skilled workers, workers understand technology, if that increases faster than the supply of those workers that, in that time, then we're going to see that push up their wages even more. So not only are they highly productive, so they're earning high wages, but then there's a relative shortage of those workers, which pushes up their wages even higher and contributes to income inequality. Now, wage inequality has increased over the past few decades for several reasons. Your textbook just lists out a whole bunch of them. So here are the things that we need to consider. Here are some of these possibilities, some of the important ones. One is supply shifts. The supply of skilled workers has increased more slowly than the demand for these skilled workers. There's this sort of skills mismatch where we don't have all the workers with the skills that firms want. So this is partly due to educational changes. More people are completing higher education, but not at the same rate that employers are seeking skilled workers. And a lot of people going to higher education, getting a college degree, may not be getting the degree and building the skills that firms really want to complement these technological changes. So the demand for this skilled labor with those specific skills that firms want, it's not just any degree, it's a degree in a relevant field. This gap pushes wages upward and it ends up widening the wage gap as well because some of these workers are earning so much more. Another thing to consider is international trade. Globalization and international trade have led to an increase in demand for certain types of skills, particularly those related to technology, to finance, and other of these high demand, highly skilled fields. At the same time, the supply of less skilled labor from countries with lower wage levels has increased. So this has put downward pressure on the wages of unskilled workers in the US. At the same time, we've had this pressure pushing up wages of highly skilled workers. We have these pushing in the opposite direction at the same time, and this has widened income inequality in the wage distribution. We also have skills-based technological change. Kind of an odd term. What this means is that advancements in technology don't affect all workers equally. It doesn't increase all their productivity the same, and it doesn't change firms' demand for those workers in the same exact way. Some workers are much more efficient, much more productive, thus much more valuable to firms, and they earn higher wages. Other workers are not. They're either being replaced by technology or it just doesn't complement them and make them more productive. So this, again, increases the demand for skilled workers who can operate and maintain these technologies while making other less skilled jobs less valuable or even obsolete. As a result, the wages of skilled workers have increased compared to those with less education or less experience. Again, another way that we're pushing these wages in opposite directions for high income earners and lower income earners. We've also seen a number of institutional changes in the United States labor market, changes in policies and regulations, both at the state and federal level, and even at the city level. So like the declines of unions or the introduction of minimum wage laws or even occupational licensing, they impact how wages are determined. So for example, declining union membership means that fewer workers can collectively bargain for higher wages, which contributes to wage inequality. Although unions continue to play an important role in some sectors, their influence has declined over the past few decades. And we talked about that wage dispersion, which unions kind of push together, collapsing the highest earners and the lowest earners, kind of like, closer to each other. As unions begin to fade, we're seeing them spread out again. Changes in minimum wage laws, especially over time, can have significant impact on the wage structure, pushing up the lower end of the wage distribution if minimum wages increase. We haven't seen increases in the federal minimum wage over the long term, although we have seen some states and especially some cities increase in the minimum wage in their areas. But for a lot of workers, we haven't seen the pressure from increases in minimum wages increasing the wages that they earn. And finally, occupational licensing. This is talked about a lot less, but myself and a few of my colleagues have a paper that we're writing on this. So the increased occupational licensing requirements, which require workers in certain professions to have a license to work, can also contribute to wage inequality. Think of occupational licensing intuitively of being kind of like unions, but for the service sector instead of for manufacturing. It's that sort of protection, although it can have the opposite effect. So it will the rise in occupational licensing kind of pushed up wages on the higher end for a lot of these professions um, with onerous licensing requirements. Things like physicians or lawyers or other healthcare providers, like even like physical therapists or occupational therapists, or increasing the education that they're required to get before they're able to enter the field, puts this restriction on their supply, but increases their wages. So all these combined to create a significant widening of the gap between low-skilled and high-skilled workers, contributing to the overall increase in wage inequality that we've seen over the past 60 or 70 years. Now, with this, I'll bring the semester to a close, and this will end our discussion on wage inequality. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me this semester as we went through labor economics together. Some of you may have enjoyed it less than others, I'll say to be polite to myself. But I hope that all of you found these concepts useful and you'll be able to apply them in your career in human resources. It's kind of tricky trying to balance the theory work with some of the practical applications that you'll be able to take with you and use in your career to make this really valuable. Going back to the chapter on education, I don't want this to be purely signaling. I want this to help develop human capital as well. So hopefully you made it through this course without too much of a headache. Now, because you're coming to the end of lecture, this means it's about time for the final exam. So please reach out to me if you have any concerns, but you also have a review sheet to help you with the topics that we're going to be covering on the exam.